before we start? Any questions from anyone?
Krishna, hi Krishna.
Yes, yes, you.
I think like we missed few sessions in between.
Mm-hmm.
So like whatever we covered, you said now that is like enough for us. And now
Yes.
this is like in depth, like SQL macros you told.
This is not a depth actually. So how it will be is as a part of an SQL, only certain things are required on SAS. Actually, as per that curriculum kind of thing, we are done with the topic. But most of like few of us are wanted to have some more concepts of a SQL. Some are also covering that in context to the SAS and as well as SQL both. So both the things are covered in context to the SQL part as well as how it should be worked on the SAS. So both of them I'm trying to cover it off. So that's the reason we have
Okay,
been
are you
discussing
covering
everything.
SQL as separately or what?
Not
Did you cover
separately in
that?
context to the SAS, but the same SQL. Even you can use the document which you are seeing now.
Okay, okay,
Even I've shared you all
okay,
the materials that is completely an SQL. So the queries which I've
okay,
given to you on the document, we can be worked onto the Oracle database. Similarly, you can work with any other database also, but still that queries are perfectly written onto the Oracle. So you can just use any other database if required. The same thing I'm now showing up on the SAS as well. But few queries we cannot work on the SAS, but still I'm showing the syntaxes on SAS that can be executed over a database. So conceptually, we are
okay,
discussing everything related to the concept wise.
okay.
On the SQL part, we are discussing everything.
So how many classes we covered for SQL?
Actually, not classes. Like I guess last entire week we are onto the SQL only. So last 2 days we
Okay, okay.
were discussing about the SQL. So today we'll be covering it off. So today, like from the Imaticas, they said me to cover anyhow with the SAS because we have been extending many classes. So today it's like a elongation for 1 more hour. So 2:30 to 5:30 is a session for today. So which will try to cover it of all the SQL part. Sorry, all the SAS part completely.
Okay,
Okay.
sure, Krishna. So
Okay.
we can refer your previous
The
like
recordings have
videos
been
and whatever file you shared.
already uploaded into the YouTube. You can even see them. I've already uploaded the day when the classes happened. The link which I've already shared
Okay,
it, which has added to all the videos one after the other as a date wise. You can see because I didn't specify on a concept based. You might get confused because of that. According to the dates, you can go through the recordings which are in a sequence. You can just go through the recordings and let me know for any questions on that.
sure,
Okay.
Krishna.
The
Thanks a lot.
materials have already been shared to your email, so you can just go through the day and every topic which is given, there is an email related to that. All the materials have been given.
Okay, sure, Krishna.
Okay.
Thanks.
So fine. So let me start with today's session. So before we go ahead, I request everyone. I've already shared one file on SAS, which is like about the proc SQL constraints, joins, and everything. So you can try to upload it on your whether it can be a SAS Studio or your SAS on demand, whatever it is. Please try to upload that. So first of all, we'll discuss the concept, we'll understand it, then we'll go with the practical implementation over that for each topic. So today on SQL part, initially we'll first cover about the constraints. After that, we'll talk about joins, the functions, little bit of functions already we have done in the SAS functions. Similarly, on the proc SQL, that is on the SQL with SAS, what functions can be used. After that, there is one more concept called views and subqueries. So all these will try to work for now. This is what we require to cover onto the SQL on SAS. So that we'll be doing it first. Okay. After that, we'll discuss about a macros, and lastly, we'll discuss about a project. So this is for our today's session, right? So whatever the email I shared before to the session, you can just download that, upload it to your university edition or SAS on demand. Just try to open it, keep it aside. First of all, we'll discuss the concept and we'll go ahead. Right. So last session we discussed about DML, DDL, and many other things. So now we left out with constraints. So any idea about constraints? Someone can let me know about it. SQL constraints. What do you mean by that? Constraints? Anyone? Anyone know about constraints of SQL? Okay. So, whenever we say a database which consists of lot many tables, and each table will be having some set of rows and columns, so that is what we call it as a structured database or structured tables. But whenever we say it's a structure, it is not only comprising of rows and columns, but certainly each type of a column that you're going to create should store some kind of a values, which we specified some data types for individual columns. So that we are calling it as a structure. But still, whenever we wanted to make some kind of a rules to be enforced on that particular columns, then we require these constraints. These constraints are some rules which are enforced on the data columns of a table, which we are enforcing it to implement over the database. So certainly limiting data as per making it more robust or more consistent, we require this constraints. So we call it as a SQL constraints. So simple to say is a rules to enforce any kind of a data column on a table. So now we'll see what are the different types of constraints which are available on the SQL or any specific databases. There are almost like 6 types of constraints. One is not null. The other one is default, unique, primary key, foreign key, and check constraint. Most of them are aware of this primary key and a foreign key. Now, if someone is not aware, like there is one constraint called not null. Can someone let me know what is a not null? If someone is aware of working on databases, not null constraint. What happens if you impose or enforce this not null constraint on a particular column? What do you mean by not null? Not null ensures that that particular column should not have any kind of a null values. No null values are accepted when you specify a not null on a particular column. So you might have a question, is that is only restricted to have it on one column or many columns? It can be on any number of columns that you wanted to enforce this particular constraint. So not null is a constraint which will not allow any kind of a null values on the data. Right. The next one is a default constraint. So what is a default? So default is a constraint which will allow a user, that is like a programmer, if you say, that programmer has by defaultly given some kind of a value at the time of creation of that particular table. If the end user is not providing a value to that particular column, still that default value which is assigned by a programmer will be stored into the table. Rather than leaving it null, it will be defaultly assigning a default value which the programmer has already defined it. So that one we call it as a constraint. So where do we use this? Whenever you are registering on some kind of a website, you might have observed that some of the columns are not mandatory. Whichever are not given with the star mark, some of them are not mandatory. But still, let's assume any user who are registering from that website from Hyderabad. In spite if they are not giving the city, the default value, if it is assigned as a city called Hyderabad, that value gets stored into the database. So that we call it as a default constraint. Okay. The next one is an unique constraint. So unique constraint ensures that all the values in the columns are unique, not having the same kind of a value, or duplicated values are not accepted. Only the unique values are accepted in that particular column. Right. So if someone has already worked on the database, can someone tell me on a unique constraint, can we have null values inserted? Does that accept it? Does anyone worked on databases? If so, if you are assigning a unique constraint on a particular column, can that particular column accepts a null value? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So can I have only one null value or many null values are accepted?
Only one.
Only one? Multiple nulls cannot be accepted?
Yes.
Okay, so fine. So one who is working on the databases, please can check on that. Can it accept only one null or multiple null values on a unique constraint? Okay, fine. So next is a primary key. So most of you might be aware of this primary key. A primary key is assigned to a particular column of a table, which ensures that a combination of not null and unique constraint is created as a primary key. So generally, no duplicated values, no repeated values, or no null values which are there in a particular column, we generally give it as a primary key. For example, our Aadhaar number, PAN number, or bank account numbers, so phone numbers, all these can be normally created as non-null, not null, and unique values, which we can create it as a primary key. So referencing that particular column of a table from one more table, we call it as a foreign key or referential key. Referencing one of the column from one table to the other table, we refer it as a foreign key. That is a primary and a foreign, which we can generally create using for relationships between the tables, right? So this is one other constraint we have, the primary key constraint and foreign key constraint or referential key. And the last one we have is a check constraint. So what do you mean by a check constraint? Well, simply to say, a conditional way of adding some kind of value to a data. For example, I wanted to make sure that anyone who is registering to the website should have an age greater than 60 years. So I give a constraint where like age greater than 60 as a check constraint. The people who are adding the values to this particular column of age cannot enter any value less than 60. So this particular constraint of check will enforce that a data should be entered on a conditional manner. So that type of constraint, we call it as a check constraint. You might even observe in most of the websites while registering them, if certainly some scores of a particular student or a particular person who is entering the values will not be accepted if the condition is given over there. So that kind of a constraint, we call it as a check constraint. Okay, so these are the 6 types of constraints which we have on an SQL, which we can enforce some kind of rules over a particular column of a table, right? So now let's try to work on them. So for this, we require to create some tables, which I'm doing it. So please everyone try to open your SQL where you have just uploaded your .sas file. If everyone opened it, please let me know so that we can just execute.
Krishna, this
Yes.
commands are same that we are using in that MySQL also.
The
I
same
mean,
thing, same SQL commands, but to execute onto the SAS, we require to put that SQL statements under the proc SQL and quit. The rest of whatever the
okay,
statements that you see in between is completely an SQL statement only. These syntaxes which we are using here is mostly on the Oracle syntaxes, or else if you are working with MySQL, any other, almost the syntaxes are similar, only few data types get varied. Apart from that, nothing
okay,
else. Rest of everything is same.
right. I
Okay.
mean, this is similar to Oracle one.
Yeah,
One
this is like
Oracle
these
data,
queries are normally SAS accepts like a Oracle SQL syntax.
Oracle. Okay, okay,
Okay,
take it.
right? So if everyone has opened it, you can go with the first one. The first constraint which we are now checking is a not null constraint. So for that, so one who have not attended any SQL classes of SAS, to execute all your SQL commands on SAS, we just require to add a procedure called proc SQL and quit. Rather than end, we use a quit statement. In between, whatever the SQL queries you are writing is purely the SQL statements from any other databases are accepted. So here the syntax generally SAS accepts is like a Oracle syntax, right? So please see this. I'm going to create a table called some name called student with some SID as a column, integer and not null is a constant I've given, some name, age is a column, so I'm going to create it. So while I am entering some values, not null is a constraint. If I'm just passing a value called null, it should have some kind of an error showing that a constraint should be assigned. So as you can see, a table got created, but there is some kind of an constraint which is supposed to be enforced, which it cannot allow me any kind of a null values to be entered into the data. Do not comply with integrity constraint. The constraint here which is stopping or not allowing me to add this data because I have a null value. So not null constraint is not allowing me to insert any values to the data. So if I pass any other value rather than this, that gets accepted, but null values are not accepted because we have a not null constraint. Okay, so this is the first one called not null constraint. The second one in the line number 10, you can observe that I'm going to create a table displaying or illustrating with the unique constraint. So here again I'm creating a table called student1. It's the same columns, but I'm just enforcing to have a constraint called unique constraint. Okay, so where the SID should hold only the unique values. So what I'm going to do now, I'm allowing a null values under this, right? So let me first execute and display the result. So when I'm executing two null values, it is able to accept only one null value at a time. So you can see here when I'm displaying it, so it has just given me the result. Sorry, where is it? Okay, so you can see here that I got an error. It's not an error actually, it is an again the constraint which is not accepting any kind of a duplicated values, right? So similarly, if I'm just putting up one more, adding up one more data like this, like insert into student as well as 1 Krish 20, 1 Krish 20. So if I'm just accepting or executing only, the unique values get added to the table. So where it is not, it is violating your constraint. That is like unique constraint is not allowing that particular value. Okay, is it clear? So when I'm just going through the unique constraint. Right? So this is about the unique constraint. So next one is a check constraint. One more constraint called check constraint. So default constraint doesn't work here. So that's the reason I have not given the syntax for the default constraint. It doesn't work at all. So I have not provided here. So now we'll be looking after for the check constraint. So please see this. I'm going to create one more table called student3 with the same SID, name and age. But here I'm just imposing one of the constraint called check, where I'm just providing SID value should be greater than 0. So if I'm just imposing this value, whenever I'm giving 0, it should not give me the result, or it should be like restricting me to allow the value. So when I'm giving this, you can see even in the log window that again that integrity constraint have violated, that it is not accepting the data. So if it is something more than 1, whatever the value based on the constraint, so that is a check constraint which I specified. Obviously more than 0, anything, that data should allow you to add a value to that. Okay, so which can display you the data for this This is what one other constraint we have is a check constraint. Okay. And next one is a primary key. So already we have discussed that a primary key, how do we create it? So primary key can be a combination of not null and unique. So here I'm going to create a table called people with some variables or columns called name, gender, height, job type and status. After that, or along with your column, you can specify your constraint name. So alternative way of writing the syntax is we are just giving it as a constraint name called primary key. The constraint name is primary key with the column called name. So for this particular column, we are going to assign it as a primary key constraint. Okay.
Krishna, one question.
Yes.
Krishna, that varchar you are using,
Mm-hmm.
it is different from char. Like for name variables, for name like it's like string type of variable, we are using char and
Right.
character. And varchar is like both. It is it different?
Alphanumerical values which will be accepting this varchar.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any special characters are actually the difference between the character and varchar is like character data type will be storing as limited number of values and which is not having a variable length, whereas varchar is a variable length we can have with more number of storage. Difference
Okay.
between the data types of char and varchar.
Okay. And for num and like int, are you are not specifying the number of digits it will
Right. It will
accept?
be
I mean,
dynamically taking it. Yes.
okay. 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 And num int are same. Uh,
Yes. Num and int like num can also have some kind of an floating point values if declared, or else we can also have a
okay.
floating
Okay.
value, whereas int will not take any kind of a floating value.
Okay. Okay. Take it.
Okay.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks.
See here, the name will be a primary key, and certainly once after we create a table, this by default gets created. So how do we check now this particular table has a primary key which got on a name variable? So to check that, we now look into the describe table. Knowing the structure of a table, we can just see into the describe table. If you just execute it, you'll see that a primary key for the name variable or the name column has been created, which we can observe for the type of constraint. So integrity constraint here is like primary key for the name. Okay. So that is how we can just check the describing a table and also what are the type of constraints which are enforced. All that we can check it from the describe table. Now, making this connection to a table, how do we create a foreign key for that? So that we'll be looking after now. There is one more point to add is like how do we add a primary key for an existing table if the table by default do not have any constraints later. Normally if you have a table created it is done, but if you do not have any kind of a constraints existing on a table, later also you can just add up your constraint using this alter command. So which I've just given it here, alter table name, add whatever the constraint to the column, so that that particular column of a table will be added with your constraint later after the table is got created. So you can use an alter statement for that. Okay. Now the next one which we are looking after for it is a foreign key. So foreign key is something like a syntax. We write it like this. So again I'm creating one more table called people here. Sorry.
Krishna, one more thing.
Yes.
That constraint primary key you have written just. So what is the statement here? I mean, name we are creating it as a primary key, and primary
We are
key
creating as a primary key.
ठीक है. So what is the I mean statement? Or what are the command you have written? Constraint prime key, primary key. This we need to
See,
write.
normally we can write it directly like this. Okay, along with the name,
Okay.
data type and a
Mhm.
primary key, we can write it. That is one way of writing them. Or else the
Okay.
other way of alternative way of writing an primary key with the name of that constraint. So how do we identify the name of a constraint? For example, if I go to the describe table in this, you can just observe this part. You can see integrity constraint given to one of them, that is the variable is a name, which is a primary
Okay.
key, where that I have a name of that particular primary key is prim key, which I have assigned it as a user. But there is one more column called as a job type, which the constraint which is enforced on that is a not null. But I have not named anything for that. So by defaultly, a database or here in the SAS will be assigning some system name for that, the primary key or foreign key or any other type of a constraint which you are giving. There is an alternative name given that for that particular constraint by a respective application or software. So this is a system generated number. So which would be difficult for someone to identify. Instead, I am giving a name for identifying my constraints. So that is nothing.
So I mean, first you checked this and then you gave. I mean, how did you? I mean, first you checked the results. You got this prime key,
No, 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 no,
prime,
no,
and
no. See,
how you directly gave that?
see how it actually works at a backend is, for example, I have a table, right? I've got this table now. I'm creating it as a people. So in this people, I have these columns called name, gender, some hire date, and so on. So for this name, I'm going to assign some kind of a primary key, right? So what all the different types of a constraint you are assigning, that particular constraints have to be stored on one other table. This is like a constraints table of a database. So here it will be showing that what type of a constraint is assigned to which column of a table. So what is that? The name is a particular column which got assigned with a primary key on a table called people or something. So this is maintained by whom? This table is particularly maintained by a respective database, whatever it is. So now let's assume I wanted to delete this primary key now. So I have to know which table it is, on which column it is. So what is happening? For assigning this particular primary key or any other constraint on a table, that particular database will respectively create some unique numbering. So here that numbering you have seen or in the result, like you can say underscore nm001, like that. Some different default numbering is been assigned to a particular database. So it would be difficult for someone to identify this numbering and just identify that type of a constraint. Rather than as a user, you are identifying with some name, which is very easy for someone to check what type of a constraint name you have assigned it. For example, if I give it as a Ruhul constraint, so it will be easy for me to check with the name of that particular constraint rather than a particular database is assigning to a default number from the system. So for that, we have this actually.
Okay, I mean, this is user defined. Like we can create our own name, right?
Yes, we are creating. This is our own name. This is the name which I've just given
Okay,
is
okay,
by
okay,
our own. It can be any
okay,
name.
okay,
It can be any name. If you're not giving anything, defaultly you can write the syntax like this. That's it.
okay, okay, okay. I thought that it is system generated,
No,
that
no, no.
prim
That is
key.
not system. This
Mm,
this one is system generated. This underscore nm0001 is a system generated one.
okay, okay.
Okay,
ठीक है. Okay, sure.
clear?
Yes.
Right. So next one is a foreign key. Mm, Okay. So sorry. Just give me a second. Just a minute, Bhushan. Just a minute. Right. Guys, can you hear me? Sorry. Right. Yeah, okay. So that is how we get to see like a different types of one of the constraint called as a primary key and the different ways of writing the syntax. One is with along with the column name, as well as along with in independent way of writing separately with the constraint name as well, specifying it. Even this is also right. Even this is also right. Whichever the way we want, we can give it. This is for assigning a name to a constraint. We are giving this way, or else we can directly assign it to the column name here. So already we discussed that we have an alter statement for assigning a particular constraint to a column of a table. So we can do it once after the table is getting created. So this is another way. Now next one we'll look after is the foreign key. So what do you mean by a foreign key here? So foreign key, I think the one which is shared is on your file is something having a problem. So I've just modified it now. Okay, so guys, you can just copy paste this to your file because I think it's copied 2 times, which I shared a file to you. So in the chat box, I'm sharing this foreign key syntax. Please take it. So here, I'm going to create a table called salary, which you can observe here with the name as one of the common column, the salary not null and bonus. So here we are writing a constraint. Let's say the name of that constraint is for key. The foreign key referencing to the name of the earlier table which we have created called people. So this particular name of this particular salary table or salary data set is now getting reference to the people table and the name of that particular column. So here we are referring this particular column to the one other table, making it as a referential key to the primary key of another table. So that way we create a foreign key or referential key. So let's say if we execute this data set, a table gets created. Okay, let's see. And I'm going to describe the table. So we should show the relation between the tables from one table referencing to the other table. So you can see the name of a constraint, which is a foreign key constraint, which is game on the name variable, and it is referencing to the people's table. So it is referencing, which is nothing but, which is making a relationship between the common columns of a table name with an other name of the table, that is a people and a salary, right? So that way we can create even the referential key from one table to the other, the primary and a foreign key. So this is one more constraint, right? So next one.
So foreign key reference only primary key.
Common column of a table. Normally we make a references generally for the primary key and foreign key of the other table. Generally we do that. Because we require to have some kind of unique values on a table, we generally do it for the foreign key and a primary key of a table only.
Okay.
Because if you give for non-unique values or any other data, that would not be an appropriate way. So we generally give it for a primary key of a table, from one table to the
I
other.
mean, foreign key of our column, we will reference to primary key of other
The
column, right?
parent table and a child table, we can say. I have one table, let's say this, if I call it as a table 1, where I have a column called name. This is the primary key of this particular table 1. Now I'm going to create another table 2, where this is having one more field called as a name here, which I'm making a reference from one of the table to the other. This would be generally a primary key of this particular table. It might be a primary or any other key of this other table, which is a common column in both of them. So that way we make a
Okay.
relationship between the tables. That is, we have the primary and foreign key, referential key,
And that
referencing to one other table.
okay. And the T2 one will be the foreign key, right? That
Yes,
child one.
this will be the child is the
Okay.
foreign key. This will be the primary key
Okay.
of the table.
Okay. And this foreign key can be the primary key of the table too also,
Yes,
no,
definitely. Yes,
Krishna?
that can be. Yes,
Okay.
yes. If it is a name of
But
this particular,
that is not a requirement.
no, that should not be a mandatory thing, but it can be. It can be a primary key of one table to the other table also.
Okay. But the thing is, the name should be common in both table 1 and table 2 for
Yes,
referencing.
yes. For the
Then
reference,
only it can.
then only it can be. Yes,
Okay.
there
Okay.
should be some
Fine.
kind of a common thing in both the tables. Then only we'll be able to make some kind of a references, right? Okay. So next one is, again we can do the alter statement. Here I'm not showing these alter statements because it doesn't get added to now because of the alter statement is not working with the SAS, but still I've given the syntax to understand more on it, right? So alter table, table name, add foreign key references, table names, all that remains same. When you're working with any other databases, you can just use the same syntax is there, right? And the last point under this is, can we add a multiple constraints upon a column? Yes, we can. So you can see here, create table, table name. I'm creating a column where I'm imposing both the constraints, not null and unique. So independently also you can give it, or else if you can give it as a primary key, both the constraints are already defaultly there, or else only one you can impose, whatever the way you want, you can just do it. Okay. So these are something related to the constraints of SQL and on SAS. Okay, clear guys, everyone, with the concept, the types of constraints we have: not null, unique, default, primary, foreign key, and check, and their syntaxes. Right, everyone? Okay, so fine. The next one to look after with the next point under the SQL is, we can work on the functions. So the document which I've shared you is a complete complete concept of the functions which I've given to you on the document. But here already the SAS functions are very huge in number. So that's the reason we have some kind of a restrictions over working on the functions with an SQL. You can use all these summary functions related to the SQL here, like average, mean, count, frequency, CSS, all the statistical related functions. You can just impose on them, or else we have already worked on these functions earlier. But coming to the SQL, these kind of functions can be used. So that functions I've just listed out with a few of the examples here, few syntaxes. So there is a table called SAS help.class. Upon that, I'm going to use this aggregate functions like maximum, minimum, average, count, sum, and everything, where you can just apply these functions over the SQL statements of SAS as well. Okay, so just you can just use it. So that's a small example I've given related to the functions. So you can just try to work on these functions onto the SQL with the SAS, right? So this is quite really very small part, the functions and types of functions and what are the different types of functions that you can use it on. SQL and SAS are few listed here. You can just work on it. Okay. The next one is another concept that we are going to look is about the joins. Most of them are very familiar with this, with the joins concept of SQL. Anyone can help me know, like what is the joins, what are the types of joins we have, so on. Anyone? Anyone ever of joins? Okay. So let me show you one small image to work on joins. So joins are right, inner join, left outer, right outer, full outer, fine. So what is a join? So join is simply to say to work with more number of tables, combining the data together, or only extracting certain part of a data from different tables. We can work onto the joins. So here the joins reference or joins can be referred as combining the tables where we have the different types of joins. Certainly we have the types of joins we have is like one is inner join and outer join. We have the two types. Within that also the inner join has equi-join and non-equi-join. Right, combining two or more tables we can use the joins. So the two types of joins we have is inner join and outer join. So under the inner join we have something called as an equi-join and non-equi-join. And in the outer join we have something called left outer, full out, right outer and full outer, the three types of joins. So here when we wanted to work with the joins, let's consider if this is a scenario, let's say the table 1 and the table 2. So if I consider this as a T1 and T2, I have some values. Let's say I call it as 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 5, 6 from the other table. So let's say when I call it as an inner join. So inner join is nothing but the values which have the common data in both the tables, like intersection kind of thing. So here we call it as an inner join. So when we say it's an inner join, the values which are fetched out from this data are the common values from both the tables, the 2 and 4. So when we say this is an equi-join, when you use an equal sign from comparing with both the tables, the equi-join will give you this particular value. There is something else called non-equi-join. Non-equi-join is nothing but any other sign rather than equals or not equal symbol or greater than, less than, any other symbol than equal sign. We call it as a non-equi-join. So what it will do is it will compare all the values from both the tables and give you the records based on the type of a symbol that you are using or an operator that you are using, and it will be giving you the values based on the comparison from the first table to the other table, which we call it as a non-equi-join. And next, which comes to the outer join, we have left outer, right outer. So what do you mean by left outer? So coming to the table 1, if I say left outer join, the entire left table is fetched with the right table common values, which means 1, 2, 3, 4 are fetched where 2 and 4 are the common values from the right table. But when I say it is of right outer join, the entire right table will be displayed with the left common values, that is 2, 4, 5, 6, where 2 and 4 are the common values from the left table. But if we say a full outer join, the entire values from both the tables, whether it is repeated, duplicated, equal or non-equal or any other values, the entire values get displayed to us. So that we have this type of a joins which we can use it with these two types of joins, that is inner and outer join. So to going in depth of it, we have something called self join, natural join, cross join, Cartesian joins. Many other joins are there, but certainly that all joins we cannot impose it here. So we are just restricting to this inner join and outer join. Okay. So now let's try to work on some syntaxes over this. So please try to look into the joins part on the document which I've shared it to you. So for me, it's line number 28. So you can just check because I've added few lines of statements here. So see this one, the joins. So everyone can try to work on them. So proc SQL, I'm going to create one table called tab1 with some one column in it. I'm not going to create many number of columns because it would be creating some confusion to the people who are new to the joins one. So let me first create this. Okay. So
Krishna, equi
yes,
and non-equi joins are under inner joins, right?
no, under inner join. Yes.
And then you said outer join, all those
left, right, and full outer comes
left,
under the
right.
outer join.
Okay, okay, take it.
Okay,
So these are the concepts we'll discuss now, right?
right, yes.
Okay, take it.
The first one which I'm illustrating is the equijoin. So before to that, first
Okay.
let me create a tables. So even parallel you can also do along with me so that it will be easy for you to understand even to it. So line number 130 for me now, it got changed. So proc SQL, create table 1, some number ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and displaying the table. I'm just doing it. So you can also execute it, which I've created table only with one column just for illustration purpose. You can work on any other tables, you can create it. Similarly, I'm going to create one more table called table 2 with 3, 4, 5, 6. So that I've got created with two tables. What is table 1 with number ID, table 2 with number ID as a column. Now the first one we'll try to work on them is an inner join. So what is an inner join? How do we write a syntax for this? So proc SQL, select star from table 1, inner join table 2. So we have different ways of writing the syntaxes, going very in depth of the joins. We have many things to discuss it, but certainly as we got some restriction, so we are discussing the way how the syntaxes can be written. So here one of the common syntax which we use is on. So on is a statement which will allow you to do it on the types of join. So we are writing it this way: select star from table 1, inner join table 2 on table 1 dot common column equals the table 2 dot common column. So here the operator which I'm using is equal sign. So table 1 dot common column equals to the table 2 dot common column. So if you see that, it is display the value which are common from both the tables, which we call it as an equijoin. The values from both the tables which are equal are displayed. Similarly, non-equijoin, the syntax and the query which we have written remain the same. Rather than using an equal sign, we are just using an less than or any other operator. So here in this example, I've just used it as a less than. So if we just execute it, we get to see that we have many values displayed comparing with the first table with the second table. So 1 less than 3, 1 less than 4, 1 less than 5, 1 less than 6, 2 less than 3, 2 less than 4, 2 less than 5, so on. So if we give any other operator, it changes its representation. So based on the type of operator, it gives us a result which is not considered as non-equijoin. Okay, so this one we call it as a non-equijoin. Apart from equal sign, we can use any other operator. The next one which we are looking is into the outer join. So here the outer join, the first one we discussed is the left outer, right outer, and full outer. The first one is the left outer. So how do we write a syntax is select star from table 1, left outer join the table 2 on the same table 1 dot common column equals to the table 2 dot common column. So if you execute it, the entire left table with right common should be displayed. The entire left table with the right common gets displayed here, which we can call it as a left outer join. Similarly, the right one. So there is another way of writing a syntax which doesn't work in this SAS, but in any other databases you can try it. So this is an alternative way of writing a syntax. Select star from table 1 comma table 2, where table 1 dot common column equals to table 2 dot common column, but you use an operator called plus sign along with the table. Then it is considered the left table you are selecting. If you use that plus sign within the parenthesis at the right side, that we call it as a right outer join. So this is an alternative way of writing the syntax, which will be working in the different database. So this database is active. Sorry, this syntax is working onto the SAS, which I kept it here, right? Now again, the next one is the right outer. which will display the complete right table with the left table values which are in common. Okay. And the last one is the full outer. The keyword that we use here is the full outer join. Here we cannot use the plus sign or something. So this is what we use it as a full outer join. So both the tables with all the values, whether it is common, uncommon, any other values from both the tables are displayed to us. So this is a full outer join, right? So these are the most common joins which are used in real time. You can just work on it. But someone who wanted to learn more in depth, like there are many other joins like natural join, cross join, Cartesian join, or self join. So they can even learn other joins as well. Okay, so the document which I provided has all this information related to it. So you can just even go through for more understanding part of it. Clear, guys? Any questions so far on this joins part? Any questions so far? Can I move to next topic called views? Right. So next one is one other concept we have called as a views. Aware of the views? SQL views? Anyone? SQL views? No idea? Anyone who worked on SQL, can someone let me know about the views? What do you mean by a view? Why it is actually required? What is the purpose of creating a views on SQL? No idea? Anyone? Okay. So let's first understand the concept behind this. Small table with conditions. Not exactly. Any other answer? So in your context, small tables with condition might be with some context, okay? But what is the actual purpose of creating a view? Why do we need it? Small table with condition might be one perception, but still that is not the exact way we use a views concept. Fine. So let me discuss. So view is a logical representation of a physical data. What do you mean by this actually? Where it is actually used in real time, we'll first understand about a concept. What is your view first? So view is a virtual table which gets created upon the physical data so that one can restrict the view of displaying some values of a table directly to some kind of a user. So simply to say another way, we can say hiding some data from displaying all the columns of a table to anyone else. So that's we generally create a virtual table upon the existing table. We create a views of SQL. So why this is actually required and how this is actually useful for improving the performance of a table on a database. So let me just give you a quick understanding about it. So let's assume I have got some table. Let's say there is a table called some employee. So in this particular employee table, I might have some columns like, for example, name, phone number, address, salary, okay, age group, as well as some other family details or something. Okay, or else is PF details or something related to a particular employee data. So if one of the user is working on this particular table and there are few more users who have recently joined the organization, let's say user 1, user 2, user 3, I wanted to give the access of this particular table to this new users of employee. But certainly I do not want to display some confidential data like their addresses or salary details or his PF details to this particularly new user. So now the administrator will not or cannot create one more table with the same name, or he cannot replicate the data if they have to see all the data which is exactly same in the existing table. So how can he can hide these particular columns to be displayed or not to be displayed for that users to be like how they can hide them. So then we got this concept of a view which we are going to create a virtual table on the existing table. We call it as a database object. As table is one of the database object, here views can also be called as a database objects. So we are going to create a virtual table upon the existing table to hide the data from any others to see. Now I'm going to create a view with the name called let's say some employee view, EMPV as my table name. But in this particular table consists of only the fields called name, the phone number, and age of the particular employees get displayed. So we are hiding the confidential data or unnecessary data to be displayed for any other users. We are creating a views. So this is the first concept which we require, why the views have been coming into the picture. And the second point in context to the administration generally. So this we call it as a non-space demanding objects, which means nothing but this is now space demanding object. So when you are creating a table called employee, this particular employee table will hold some data on your physical disk, let's say 100 MB, 1 GB, whatever it is. Whereas this is a non-space demanding object where no space is occupied, only the definitions are getting stored in this particular views or database object, which means there is no space occupied, which is not having any kind of an overhead to your databases. And how this is really useful? One is for the first purpose is for hiding the data from anyone to restrict some usage of a value. That is the first one. The second one is the performance. How do we increase the performance of a particular data or a tables on a database is we create this kind of a views. What is this? So you might have been using some of the busiest websites, which we use it in India very commonly. Let's say, for example, some IRCTC website or any other booking tickets or any other websites you might have seen, a huge user traffic would be there. Let's assume if someone is using IRCTC for booking some railway tickets, let's assume there are some 1,000 users who have logged into that particular database. Is all the 1,000 users booking the tickets? No. Let's say there are only 200 users are booking a ticket. The rest of 800 members are only viewing the availability of a ticket which they do not want to purchase at all. But in spite, as these 1,000 members have logged into the database, there is a load on the database whoever is viewing into the different tables of a data. But certainly only 200 members are booking the ticket. In spite, the load for the database is about all the 1,000. So what we are doing now, just we are creating a view upon the availability where all these 1,000 are first working onto the view of a table. If someone wanted to make some kind of a purchase of a tickets, then only that particular 200 members are actually logging onto the table or any kind of a database to perform some operations on it. The rest of 800 are just only viewing the data. So what is happening? Your load on the complete database is getting lessened because of you're not at all having that particular user making some kind of a transactions over the database, as they are just only accessing the view of a table. So which increases a very good performance onto the databases. So that's the actual purpose why the views have been used, for two purposes: hiding the restricted data or confidential data or unnecessary data to someone. Second is the improvements of performance of a database can be improved by not allowing every user to work onto the databases unless required. So that's actually the concept of a view, right? Clear, everyone, guys?
Krishna, that means that a view is not even taking any space. I mean, 10 GB of
No,
data you told.
you don't have any
It is
space.
just a viewing.
We just
We are
only
just viewing it, right?
that's it. See,
Display.
right. For example, like to be making it very much simplifier, I'm calling upon a magnifier, for example. So what is a magnifier? You can see I've just magnified few things on my file. So what exactly is there at the bottom is that you're seeing it here, but something you're restricting from the view. So view is also doing the same thing. You are just magnifying upon few things where it is getting displaying you the value, but only certain part of it which you do not wanted to display it at all. So that's what we are doing it on the magnification. Clear? Rule, is that clear?
Thanks, Krishna.
Right.
Yeah, got it.
So now what we are going to know. So there are types of views we have. So views are almost like a security purpose, and we have 4 types of views under this. One we call it as a simple view, complex view, read only, and view with check. So what do you mean by simple view? In the previous example which I said you, from one table, if you are going to create a view upon it, and we can perform DML operations on the view. The same thing, view doesn't store anything. View will not have any other operations to perform. The same data will be reflected onto your original tables. So you can perform a DML operations onto the simple view, which is you are creating upon a single table. There is something called as a complex view. What do you mean by that? When you're extracting the data from different tables with different number of columns, and you are creating upon a view upon the multiple tables, we call it as a complex view. But here you cannot perform any DML operations, because if I say insert into view name, you doesn't know from the data which table it has come from. So you will not be able to perform any kind of an DML operations onto the complex view. Next is read only. The read only is a very simple example, the IRCTC which you are seeing it. So if you just open it, you are able to only display the values, but you cannot make any changes to them because it is only a read only. The last one is a check. So as I said, on a simple view, you can perform the DML operations. So if someone is making a restrictions over that, we generally do it with the check constraint that we learned in the constraint. The same way we call it as a check option here. So conditionally allowing the data even onto the views, that we have the other 4th type called check view with check constraint. Okay, so these are the 4 types of views we have. So let's them try to work on the syntaxes on SAS. So see here, what I'm going to do, I already have one of the table called SAS help.class, which you guys have been working on the previous examples also. So you can see here, I'm going to create only the limited columns of a particular table as a view. So how do we write a syntax? Create view, some view name, as, select only the 3 columns from the table. Even if you wanted to apply more conditions also, you can do that, like using the where statement, conditionally creating the values, and so you can do that. So when you execute it, you see that one of the view gets created. So when you print the values, select star from simple view, so you get only displayed with the 3 columns. So you're hiding the rest of the other columns, if any, by creating a view. So if you go to the libraries, you'll be seeing under the work library, there is some kind of a simple view which got created here with some kind of a representation. You can see a table with some kind of a gear wheel kind of thing. So this is the iconic representation of a view on SAS. One other object, right? So this is a simple view. So to know that information related to the simple view, describe view, it will be giving you the description again from which columns the table or the view have been created. So that will be displayed to us. And next is a complex. This I'm not working. I've just given the syntax because I don't have the tables like this. So what I'm going to do, create view name as select few columns from one table, few columns from other table, and we are making upon the joins kind of thing, and we are going to create a view upon multiple tables. So this we call it as a complex view, which we can create it. Okay. And the next one is read only. I'm going to create a table with new and creating a view upon it as a read only, which will create it as a read only. We cannot make any DML operations onto that. But here this syntax is not getting recognized with the SAS, but I've given the syntax. So you can just even look after for that. So what is the syntax we write is create view name as select star from the existing table with read only. So when you do that with the read only, so it is not allowing that to have this particular statement recognized in the SAS. So this is not working, but this is a syntax. How do we write with the read only view? And the last one is the check view. So here again, this syntax doesn't work. With check option is not working, but syntax is right for any other databases. Create view name as select star from table name with the constraint or the condition that you specify with option. Okay. So this is about the views of a database, the 4 types of views: simple, complex view, read only, and check. Right? Is it clear?
Krishna, what is no num? What is no num?
Where it is?
You specified that in in the command. Scroll up once. No number, I think you mentioned.
No,
Yeah,
no,
no
no.
num 10.
No, not no num. It is a column name. It is a
Okay, okay.
column name, and the data type is number.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
I thought some other. Okay,
Nothing like that. Just give me a second. Yeah, I'm sorry. Fine. So we'll see with one other last point called subquery. So anyone ever of subqueries? Subquery. Any idea about subquery? Anyone know about SQL subqueries? Okay, so to be very simple and concise, subqueries, query within a query or nested queries, we can say, is a subquery. So what is the need for having this subqueries? Why do we require it? So query within a query is called a subquery, right? So what is the need for having this subquery? So let's say I have a table. So first let me display you something. So select star from SAS help.class, which I have a table here, which I want to display. So for me, on this particular table, I wanted to display the some of the aggregate function over this. What do you mean by that? So let's say I wanted to find out some maximum aged person on this particular data. So I'm applying select max age from sassel.class. So which will be displaying me the maximum age on this data. So let's say I want to give some name of a column as max age and display it. So it is showing that the maximum value upon this particular column called age, which is fine. But now I want to display for which person is this age. I want to know that person or any other details of that particular person who is having the age with 16. So how do I find it? Can someone tell me about a query? How can we write it? I wanted to get who is the person and the rest of the other details, fetching the row of the person who is having the age called 16. So someone would be giving generally the answers like if I write like this, select name, comma, age, comma, so on. So if I just write it like this, what would be the result? So you can see here, I got the name and age column, but along with one more column called max age is completely displaying that it is for the 16, right? Because I specified to display the entire column of name, the entire column of age, as well as which we wanted to find out is the maximum age. So that's the reason we got is this result called 16. But I wanted to find out the person with one single row whose age is 16 out of this. So then how can we achieve this? So if I'm writing the query something like star or any other columns, it is fetching the entire one or more column or the entire table data with one more column called max age, which is not a right way to find out. So how can we achieve this? So then we require this subquery. So query within a query. So what is this query within a query? Let's assume I have executed this query result, and the result which is got to us, we call it as a result set, is something called as a 16. So now based on this value, I wanted to find out the rest of the value or rest of the rows or rest of the row details we wanted to find out. So what should I write a query? I wanted to find out, let's say, select that particular entire column star from table, right, where age equals to the result set. So what is the result set? Is 16. So if I write a query, I get to see that entire table display based on a condition. Here the condition I have written is where age is equals to the result set. So how we are getting this result? is when we executed one of the query that select max age of the table. So then we are able to do it. So what is that we are doing now? There is one query which is getting executed first upon the one other query. So simply to say, this is something called inner query, which we have a result set stored. Upon this result set, we are going to write one more query to display the values of the entire table. So we are calling it as an outer query. So this particular things which we are able to do it using an subquery for us, right? So that's the need we require a subquery to be executed. So that way we are using it. So to make it more simple, I've just taken one more table called employee table, where you can just create this table with some values. Okay, so I'm just going to create this table called employee, which have some values over this. And certainly, what is the maximum salary from this employee table? The same example which I've shown on the other table is now displayed. So which employee is having the maximum salary on this table to be displayed? So how do we write? So you can see here, I'm writing the inner query, select max sal from EMP. So what is the maximum salary we got? The maximum salary is 5,000. So something which I want to display like this is select star from employee where salary equals to 5,000 will be my entire query which gets executed after this particular result. So this one we call it as an inner query. This one we call it as an outer query, where the first inner query is executed and we get to create a result set. So that result set is this one. Upon this result set, we are executing the outer query so that we can achieve this kind of an result based on the requirement for finding out certain values. So that is a need. We have this subquery, query within a query. Okay. So we have different types of subqueries again, going depth, like we have multi-row subquery, multi-column subquery, correlated subquery, and there is something called exist, having, many things again, going very in depth of this subqueries. But certainly, few examples given here is how to write multi-row subquery or something. So here I'm just writing one more syntax for multi-row and multi-column. So first of all, I'm just showing you the inner query value. So what is that inner query I'm writing is select star salary from employee where salary between 2,500 to 4,000, where I'm fetching few records related to that. Now I wanted to find out the employee details for all these values to be displayed for all the rows. So I'm having a multiple row as well as multiple columns to be fetched out from this result. So where I'm going to execute the inner query first. Upon the inner query, we are getting the outer query executed with multi row out of it. Or let's say here it is a multi column also. Fine. So that is what we have, this multi row subquery. The next one is multiple subqueries. We can write multiple subqueries in this. Can you see this, guys? The last one, I'm writing multiple subqueries on it. So what is select maximum salary from employee? Again, select maximum salary from employee where so and so. So I've written the same queries again and again. Right? Can someone let me know what exactly is the result gives us? So what is the result for the inner query first? So when you find out this, select maximum salary is that we are getting. This will be the first query executed. After that, again, we are writing select maximum salary from employee where salary less than. So that is, for example, in this result set, it is something called 5,000. So we are finding out the value less than 5,000 is something like this. So let's say 4,000 or something. So which I wanted to display the result for this. So what is that I'm finding out? What is the right? Salary less than the maximum salary. So that is, this is the first highest salary, this is a top second salary, and display their particular result. So fetch the salaries who is having the second highest salary from the table. So there are two guys with salary called 3000, which you are displaying the value for that. So this kind of a queries we can write it for displaying certain set of result for us using this sub queries, right? So this is something related to the subquery which you can understand on this, right guys? Clear? So with this we are done with the SQL concepts on SAS. So the document which I'm providing, there are some more additional concepts which are there in SQL, like indexes, synonym sequences, which we cannot work on SAS at all. And this is again a simple like indexes, creation of indexes and all that. So which you can just refer it to that for more understanding on them, right? But for the in context to the SQL and SAS, we have covered every part of it onto the SAS part with SQL. Hope all the concepts are clear. Right? Any questions so far? Anyone? Anyone? Any questions so far for this SQL part?
Krishna, for SQL, you have provided documents. So those documents, some commands will be there which will not work in SAS. So we can use it
In the
for our
databases,
purpose.
yes, you can use it any other databases also. So I have shared you
Okay.
every document related to that, like whatever proc SQL SAS codes is what you'll be able to work
Okay.
on the SQL. So something which you're finding a very frequent error. So which means that syntaxes are not working with the SQL on SAS. So that you can try with any other database. And many other examples have
Okay.
been provided. Even that also we can see.
Okay.
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 And one other last part of this SQL is, so as we discussed that SAS is able to connect to any database which is there in the market. So this feature we are not able to work on this university edition because it is not connected to any other databases here. But if you wanted to connect to any other database, there is a facility in SAS called SQL pass-through facility to get the data directly from any databases or any different databases. So what is the syntax to write? Proc SQL connect to the database. For example, here it is Oracle. So which user and the password. So this is what the connection you are establishing it with one of the database. One line query you have to write it. After that, you're going to create a table and you're selecting the connection from which database you're accessing and which table you wanted to pull all the data from. So because that particular table database consists of lot many data types and data structures, but when you're copying it, it will be converted into the SAS data set. Simple. So whatever the database you have connected, you are disconnecting it because you can connect it to multiple databases at a time and multiple users of different databases can also be connected. So connection and disconnection is very important. So this way, for this kind of a syntax, you can work with any other database, not only with Oracle. You can work with any other databases you want that you can connect and pull all the data from different data sources. So under this course, we learned with the SQL and we learned with CSV files, text files, Excel files, and so on. But we didn't have any access to the databases. If we still wanted to do it, we can just connect it by this way. Okay, so this one we call it as an SQL pass-through facility. So this is one other point to remember on SAS with SQL. Clear, guys? Everyone? Right? Any questions so far on SQL, all this, whatever we discussed so far? Any questions on this? Okay, if no questions, do you need any break? There is one other topic to cover called macros of SAS. So that is again little bit huge. So before to that, you require any break? We have to extend till 5:30 today. So probably might extend even more, but at least till then I'll try to complete it off. If you guys need a break, let me know so that we can have a quick break and get back.
Sure, Krishna, let's have a break.
Okay, fine. So let's have a break for 5 to 10 minutes. Like it's now 4:12, so we'll be back by 4:20. So 8 minutes of break, right? So after that, we'll try to discuss about the macros one. And lastly, we'll see about the project so that we'll be completing all the SAS for today. Fine. Okay, guys. Meet after a break, 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, guys, everyone back? Right. I've shared an email. You can just even open the quotes as well as the presentation. So I request everyone to look into the presentation. This is quite really important than executing the syntaxes or something, because we need to understand it. And moreover, the first point is everyone who is really interested to prepare upon the SaaS kind of thing, the first thing you have to do is completely understand the basis. So whatever the topics that we have covered before to the SQL, all that falls under the basis concepts. Many topics we discussed about, like a collection of data, like organizing conditions, data management, functions, statistics, reporting, that is ODS and graphs, all that will be falling under the basis. So first you should be very much thorough about that. After that, then you can go with the SQL. So whatever that SQL we have discussed, the concepts are completely the same, but in spite more observation of a syntax is all that you can do from the examples which are provided. And lastly, you can come back to the macros. It is a little bit difficult compared with the other topics. I don't say it's really difficult, but it is again same as the basis. But if you do not know the basis, then this would be a difficult one. So obviously, you should have gone through the complete basis, then come to the macros at the last. Okay. So this will be the last topic of our entire the SaaS course, which is the SaaS macros. So which will be doing it now, right? So the first and foremost that we'll be observing is the presentation. Please make a note of any thing if it is understanding, like if it is required at going through the presentation. Like working on the syntaxes, you can do it later, because if I still execute, most of the executions which are made from the syntaxes are prepared from this presentation only. The same examples have been given there. We can even do it later. So first and foremost is understand this slide or the presentation, very much important. Then we'll discuss about few things on the execution part of this macros, right? So now we'll go to this macros part of SaaS. So what do you mean by a macro? So one who is already aware of Excel macros, they might say this is the same macros or something. So like not exactly very similar, but the concept of macros have been introduced on SaaS. The one of the most major reason is reusability. So whatever the programming of SaaS that you have learned so far, right from the first till now, you might have observed that there is no concept of reusability. So what do you mean by that? Let's say you're writing some kind of a code. That same code you're going to, like if you wanted to use the functionality of it, you're supposed to write the code once again. So there is no way that you have specified anywhere with the reusable or existing code cannot be used again and again for implementing the existing functionality of it. So in order to overcome that, we require this feature of macros of SaaS. So simply to say, the reusability of the existing functionality of any SaaS code to be made use, then we require to have this kind of a functionality called reusability, called or achieved by the macros, right? So what do you mean by a functionality? How do we create it? So simply to remember, the very first we worked about some kind of a SaaS format, that is user defined format. So if one of the user is defining any particular format, again that should be reused. So that reusing again and again, if we wanted to do it, we require to write a code. So rather than writing a code to make use of the existing one, we can make use of this macros from this. So we call it as a reusability. And this macros will enable you to have the code complexity lesson, because you already have the existing functionality with you. So someone who wanted to extend that particular functionality with some additional code of SaaS, then they can make use of this macros. So it is not required for them to again write the hundreds and thousands of lines of code for getting the same functionality, because that functionality is already existing within the macros. So for that, we use this macro facility. It's a simple way to understand it. So here we can simplify and understand that this is for the reusability concept which we require on the SaaS model, and which can also minimize a huge coding by adding some existing codes of the modules or that we have been created using the macros. So what we are going to learn now is nothing much. We are again learning the same kind of a SaaS, but we're required to add few more things. So the learning is very much minimal on this macros part, right? So let's see what else we can add up here. So here to do this, what we have. So obviously, whatever the points we just listed out, the same points here, which can help you out for more efficient way of writing the codes, more effective way of writing the codes, making the application simpler, making the code customized, and create certain modules. All these are the different functionalities. So what is that we are going to learn in addition is nothing that we are going to learn in addition something called macro variables and macros. So what do you mean by a macro variable? So macro variables are nothing but, if you remember the earlier programming that we have learned, we created a macro variable, we created a SAS variable and assigned a value to it. Assume that you have created a variable and a value is assigned. You cannot make use of that particular value in any other programs apart from that you have created it. So again, if you wanted to make use of it, you are again supposed to create a variable and assign a value to this. To overcome this, we are going to now create a macro variable. So for example, I've created a value of a to be stored in this, a variable called a, and a value 100 to be stored, which I wanted to use it. I'm going to create a macro variable that I can invoke any other time in any other place with an macro variable identified with an ampersand sign. So ampersand a refers to the macro variable and a value that you have created. So we can use this any other time, any number of times you want. You can just use it with the macro variables. That's a simple point to remember. The next one is a macro. So macros are nothing but the SAS defined statement, nothing in addition. But as there is some kind of a processor to execute all the macro statements of SAS, we just need to use a percentile sign. For example, we are using some SAS statements like do, else, if, then. All these are the SAS statements, but to make the macro processor to execute all these statements, we are supposed to use a percentile sign, as this has to be identified by the macro processor, which executes all the macro statements. So that is nothing but the macros. So these are the two new things which we are learning apart from the SAS base that we have learned so far, right? So let's now go deeper and understand more. So how does macro works? So macro works same as the SAS programming, nothing new. But whenever you write some kind of a macro statements, there is a macro processor at a backend. So that particular macro processor will convert all your SAS statements to your standard SAS statements. So this standard SAS statements again will get executed and will have the compiler interpreter, the same kind of a thing will be executed. So, but what is the purpose of having this one? So let's say whenever you have executed your macros, so that particular macros will be executed from the macro processor, and all these compiler interpreter, all this story will get done here, and all your macros are stored into the macro processor. So next time, whenever you are getting to use it, it doesn't require to execute all the process. It can directly invoke from this macro processor, which is executed and stored. Right. So this makes it very simple without rewriting again and again, and also makes it very faster to execute. We can just get these things done. So that is how we have this macro processor at a backend to do it. Okay. Right. So next one is about how do this macros work and what are the new things we are going to see it. Right. So there are two parts of a macros. One is macro variables and a macros, which we have already just discussed. So now the macro variables are identified with an ampersand sign and macros are identified with a percentile sign. So this is what we have seen, right? So now by defaultly, is the macros can executed in the SAS? Yes or no? Yes, the macros can by default get worked onto the SAS because it is already embedded on that. So to check whether the macros are turned on or off, we have to execute this procedure called proc options equals to macro. So if you execute it, that particular log window displays you whether it has got executed or not. So this will by defaultly show you that it will allow use of SAS macro facility. So please remember, all the macros output will be displayed in the log window, not on the output, because log window is faster than the traditional output window. So every result will have the output displayed onto the log first. Okay, so now, so how do we create these macro variables? How do we substitute a value to that? All that we'll first see into it. So to create any macro variables on SAS, so here we have something called percentile let, a new statement. Okay, and you can see this is a macro variable. So simple way to write is percentile let is a statement. I'm going to create a macro variable and assigning a value to it. So this is simple way of creating or substituting a value. Okay, so here when I'm creating, these are some examples. Some patient ID equals to some name equals to some iterations equals to some different variables and the values are created. So here, why do we create this? Why have we created this? While we are creating all the macro variables, macros have a capability to identify all the numericals and character value. There is no specific requirement that you have to give a dollar sign to it or something. So not required for us. Okay, so this is how we can create a macro variables. So let's see how we can implement this particular thing. We are writing some basic loop, do I equals to ampersand of iterations. Okay, so what is that? It means, so when you are writing a do equal I equals to ampersand of iterations, I'm writing do I equals to 1 to 10, which I wanted to write it. Okay, so instead of that, I'm going to write it here as do I equals to ampersand of iterations. So what is the value of iterations stored there? It's a 10. So very simple to understand is, if I wanted to write it the same kind of a logic in some different number of programs. So for example, I've written do I equals to 1 to 10, and I'm supposed to change this value of 10 to 1000 in whatever the n number of programs I have written it. So you have to manually go to that particular n number of programs and change this value. But instead, wherever this kind of an macro variable is there, you can just make that change from 10 to 1000, and that gets reflected in your n number of programs that you have defined it. So it will be a less time consumption, the complexity gets decreased. So all that can be achieved using this macro variables. So that's how it is getting simpler. Okay, so that is the use of macro variables. So now even the display that you can do it on the titles also, but your titles have to be placed under the double quotations. So when you place your macros under the double quotes, the values get displayed even under the double quotations. The value will be displayed onto your titles. So that makes your report more easier for day-to-day activity, right? And next is local and global. I guess most of you might be aware of this local variable, global variable, the same concept here. So local is confined to a code, whereas global is defined somewhere and can be used in any other codes. So local can be only within a particular code, which cannot be used beyond this. Any value which is defined globally and can be made use any other code or any other times, we call it as a global. Right, the same way, the same functionality is here again. We have the local and global. Right, and next one, please see this data set. Please try to observe as we have just created a macro variables, how this would be used in a real time. We can see with one example here. So that is creating a data set called HSB2 with all the variables. Right, we have some variables called ID, female, race, SES, PROG, read, write, math, science, so on. So as I've got this data set and I'm going to perform some kind of a procedures over this data set. So proc means var with some variables, again with some variables. So now I'm going to repeat n number of data sets, n number of procedures, n number of variables. So it would be really a time consuming, and defining each and every variable to your procedure would be a tedious part. And if you wanted to make some changes, you are supposed to make all the changes to the different places wherever you have defined it. So in order to overcome them, what we can do? We are simply creating a macro variable, assigning all the values to it. And we are just invoking that macro variable to be involved in every procedure that you are going to execute. So if you wanted to make any changes, you just make a change over here that gets reflected in every macro that you have just enabled that. So that makes your programming complexity lessened, and you can easily manage with all these macro variables. Right? So that is the first importance. How do we work with these kind of a macro variables on the programming part? The next one is a statement called put. A put is a statement. Normally we write everything like a proc print to display the result. So which will be displaying the result in your output window. But there is a statement called put which will help you to display the result of any variable value in the log window. As well as if you wanted to add some kind of a text, that text gets added to the put statement. So here we have something called as a percentile put. This same statement of put, we have a percentile put statement to display. So here I have created a variable. That variable values I wanted to display it here. That's it. Okay. So put statement will help you to display the result of a particular value in a macro variable or in standard SAS data step also. Rather than writing a proc print, we use a put statement for this. That is the use of put statement, which can be used as a macro variable here, or macro statement called percentile put statement. Right? And next one is system defined macro variables. If you remember, we have executed some proc options at the very first of our SAS sessions. I don't know how many of you remember it, like proc options to have the system options. That is one is no date, no number, line size, all that. The other one is like few other. Just give me a second, please. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. So the same as the proc options, that is the system options we have here, we are working on the SAS existing, that is a macros existing statements. So what is a macros existing statements is, if I wanted to make use of the existing and make our code more automated, then we can use this automatic macro variables, which you can just see it by executing percentile put underscore automatic underscore. Okay, so let's see, if I execute it, you'll be able to see few statements like this, like system date 9, system day, system error, system environment, all that. So all that we can just directly get it without recreating every time. So how do we do that? Let's see how do we implement that in our code. So if I just implement like this, we're making a title. So every day I'm taking a report of my some of the reports to be generated every day. So we're writing the program something like this, that is today's date is sysday 9 and today is system day. So what is happening? Whenever the report gets executed, we can see the date and day generated automatically rather than creating or writing your manual days of your report getting generated. So this will make your code more easy and more simplified. Similarly, any number of users who have created certain macro variables, if the other user wanted to use a similar type of a value, rather than creating a new variable, he can just re-verify to see whether that variable is existing by executing a statement called percentile put underscore user underscore. If you just execute it, it will show you whatever the macro variables which got created and what are the values stored in it. We'll be able to only see the global variables, will not be able to see the local variables created because that is independent of a user. So here whatever the other users which have created as all the global variables can be displayed, which can be made use by other users also. So that is one we can see understand is underscore automatic underscore, the other one is underscore user underscore, right? So here the functions. Next part is the functions. If you remember the functions of SAS, like uppercase, lowercase, can, substring, combl, whatever the functions we have learned, every function here remains the same just by writing a percentile sign because the macro processor has to identify them. So how we are writing it? With one of the example you can see here, uppercase of indvars, scan of indvars, substring of indvars. So put is to display the value. So when you're displaying it, you can see the uppercase result, the scan result, the substring result, everything we get it displayed. So that way we can use these functions, and these functions will really help to automate our coding. So how do we do that? Let's see with some example. So here we are writing data out.substring of sysday 1, 3. So I'm going to generate a report every day of a week. So I wanted to create a report on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I doesn't require to create a table every day. So this particular table, if you're writing it, create substring of sysday, that is Monday 1, 3 MON. If your report is getting executed, it will be created as Monday report, Tuesday report, so on. So that is how this particular codes can enable you to automate your programming rather than making changes to your code every day for reporting easier, right? And now the one other major feature comes is the modular code with a macro. Everyone please understand this. If you see this one example, you'll come to know what is the importance of a macro. So the syntax we are writing is percentile macro, so macro name, macro statements and ending. So we are now creating a functionality. Till now we have just only created one variables. Now we are going to create a functionality. Let me show you with one example on this. So now let me directly open. I'm going to create a macro, let's say macro with some name called DSP22. Here I'm going to create some functionalities like proc print run, proc univariate and run, proc means and run, so on, whatever. So now I'm closing this is mend, macro ending, MEND. We are not using an end because with the do loops also we use an end. So here it is a macro ending and specify the name of a macro. So simple, percentile macro, name of a macro, whatever the functionality you wanted to create it, just execute all that, and ending with the percentile mend, macro ending and the macro name. So if you just execute it, it will be creating some kind of a macro on a work library. So in this version, we don't get to see, generally they'll be creating some kind of a catalog file at a backend. So which means catalog is nothing but all the system related files are stored. Now these macros are created and stored into the work library. So now I wanted to implement all this to be done onto the data set. So let's say data sample set existing data set anything. So let's say SAS help dot class and run. Now I wanted to create a report on this data set, like printing, taking some statistical measures and some univariate analysis or something. I wanted to implement upon a data set or data sets. So rather than writing all that, I'll just now invoke my macro which I've just created it, that is DSP22. If you just execute it, you'll be able to see the result now, which got a print of the data set, which got all the univariate analysis, as well as you can see the mean value. Right? With only one line of code. So whatever it is, you just change the data sets, invoke upon the data or the data you already have, and then you can create this executing functionality which is already there, and you can just invoke them. So which makes your code very simpler, very faster, and very easier to work on it. So this is the actual functionality of a macros, which we call it as a modular code with a macro. Right? So that is the actual use of this macros functionality. Hope everything.
Hi Krishna.
Yes, Rohit.
Can you explain that part once more? Like initially, what code we would have written that part again?
We'll
If we have not written the macros.
See, I don't have anything with me, right? I'm going to create a macro. So what is that? Just write percentile macro, name of a macro. For example, let's say I call it as a Rahul, right? In this, I wanted to create some functionality. What do you mean by functionality? Executing some report on my data set. So I wanted to display a statistical measure called proc means for any of the data set I wanted to do. I wanted to print some data, and that is what one other procedure I'm executing. I wanted to even give some kind of an univariate analysis, or let's say regression or anything. I'll put it as a univariate and run. So on one of my data set, I want to display all these statistical procedures. So whatever that I've created, I'm just ending this like mend with the name of a macro. That is, name of a macro is Rahul here. So initially, first I execute this macro code, which will be created as a modular code at a backend with having all these three functionalities of three procedures. Okay. So now this got created and which was stored in the backend. Now assume I'm just invoking a data set that is, let's say, some test data set, making use of existing SAS data sets data called.
Sorry to interrupt, Krishna.
Yes.
You said that macro is created in the backend. Where exactly it is getting created?
Actually, it gets created in the library, work library, which will be creating. There is normally how it happens is in the other software, it will be creating something called as a catalog file, a folder kind of thing. Under this folder, you'll have a name. If you open that, you should have a name called a folder called Ruhul and DSP22. There should be these files displayed. We don't have anything open from that, but these are the macros which got executed by us will be stored here in the work library, which you don't see it here at all. Earlier, when you have created a views, you are seeing this kind of a visualization, like you can see some icon. Similarly, there is some kind of a catalog icon which will be created, which stores all the macros that you are creating it. So that should be the functionality actually, but that is not getting displayed on this SAS Studio. Okay.
Here it is not displaying, but
here it is not getting displayed. In the
actual
software, it will get displayed. Actually, this is now first getting saved into the work library. Similarly, you can save into the permanent libraries and make use of it any other time. Right. Now,
can we export this? See, we have created one macro. Here, I want to give it to you. How can I give it to you?
Right. So, do you remember there is a procedure that we learned called proc copy?
Yes.
Over there. Like, okay. So proc copy, we have just shared our data sets. We have copied a data set from one library to the other library. The same way, you can also even copy the catalog file, that is a macro catalog files from one user to one other user, one library to other library, all that you can do it. So it is simply like a folder where you can just copy it. For example, if I open this library, so right click, now this is a data set. You can see there is a export, duplicate, all that. The same way, the catalog files can also be exported to someone anywhere which are connected to each other. And that can be made use by anyone else.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, right. So now for this data set called test, I wanted to execute all these procedures. So rather than writing all that procedures once again, I'm just using percentile. That is the macro name. I've just given a name called Ruhul. So if you just execute it, there is a cars data set which will now create all the basic things like means, printing, univariate, whatever all you have specified, all that functionalities gets displayed to us. Right? So that is the actual feature of the macros. Ruhul, is it clear now?
Yeah. Thanks, Krishna. I got it.
No.
And Krishna, can you again explain that what you were explaining in the beginning? Like we are creating the macros now. You said like macro variables. We are using ampersand and
Right.
that part. The how you are creating it once.
Right. I'll show you.
Yeah.
So you can see here just one example. Percentile let some macro variable name. Here I'm giving it as sex equals to f. Okay. So percentile let macro variable name and a value. Right. So if I'm just executing this, which is nothing created at a backend, but you'll have some macro variable which will be holding this value of f into the variable called sex. So now I'm writing a program like this, proc print data equals to data set, where sex equals to female. I wanted to write it, but rather than writing it, I've just invoked my macro with ampersand value name. So when you execute it, you'll get to see that value with all the females have been stored in the macro variable that you have created and assigned to it. So that's how you are creating it. That's it.
The
Yeah.
ampersand that
Is
and you are calling, na?
we are calling this ampersand value.
Okay.
Is the value
So
sex is getting overwritten? Sorry, Rahul.
Yes, Bhushan. It will be overwritten. For example, let's say I've executed this sex with M now. So I've just executed it. Now the F is overwritten with M. So if we get to the result executed, you'll see all the male values.
mhm.
Got it.
Got it?
Okay. So first we have created this variable male and female under sex, and then you are calling that under macros, right?
Right,
And then
absolutely.
displaying the result.
Displaying the result. For example, assume that you have this value to be called for n number of data sets. So every time you are writing a condition and doing everything, instead you wherever you wanted the value called f, you're just calling it with the ampersand, the variable name, making it simpler.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Okay, okay.
your value can be used any other times, any number of times. So this is an example I've created, but when you're writing on a coding, this will be really useful for us. Any values if you wanted to call out.
Okay, okay.
So that way it will be useful.
Sure. So for creation we are using percentile, and for
Percentile
calling we are using ampersand, right?
ampersand, yes.
Okay, okay. Thanks, Krishna.
Okay.
You said for creating let, right?
Yes.
Percentage let.
Declaration.
And yes, and earlier you said put also somewhere.
Right. Put is nothing but display. Normally we write proc print for displaying anything, right? So rather than that,
Right.
we use a put statement for displaying even that values. So you can see here percentile put underscore automatic underscore. So put is to display all the execution into the log window. Now we can see here there is something called like system date. Okay, system date 9, system day, all these are displayed because this is used with a put statement. So put is something like a proc print kind of thing. That's it. Okay. Right. The same example which I've shown here, the similar things we can see it in this presentation, nothing much else. But the point to remember there is, whenever we have executed that particular macro, it completely gets executed over a data set. But if I wanted to interpret any value in between, or else, for example, what is the value for males, what is the value of females, if I wanted to do identifying that, it will not be done because you are now completely working on a data set using a macro. So now to overcome that, what can be used? Let's see with some example. So there is a data with us here, some 240W, 356W, so on. Now upon this, I wanted to pass a value based on some customer ID. So in order to pass a value at the time of execution, we call it as a parameters, creating a parameter. So you can see here percentile macro name parameter equals to parameter 1, 2, 3, any number of parameters you can create it. So what is that parameter I've created in one of the examples? There is a parameter called customer equals to sort variable equals to. So while at the time of invoking, I said customer to pass a value called 356W, sorting a variable on the variety which is on the data set. For the customer 240, I wanted to do the sorting on a variable quantity, which means, well, at the time of execution, I wanted to invoke a particular value and do certain operations over the macros which is getting executed. So in the earlier situation, I've done it on the complete data set, but now here I'm doing it on a particular value of a data set which we require to pass these parameters. So you can see for 356W, variable variety is sorted. For 240W, the quantity is sorted. So that we call it as a parameters, passing a value based on the result or a value of a execution from a code, right? So this one we call it as a adding parameter to a macros. Similarly, all the different conditional logics, if then else if, everything remain the same. The only thing is you just need to put a percentile sign because the macro processor has to identify that particular statement. That's it, right? So in the real time, few automated codes are created like this. If says day equals Monday, then proc print. Else if says day equals to Tuesday, proc means. Else if says day equals to Wednesday, something else, something else. So there is no need for making all the changes to your code. There are certain opportunities which I've seen in many of the organizations. The reporting and the coding would be generated by the client itself. You are supposed to execute making some changes to the code, not everything, very minute changes, and you generate reports. So that's how some day-to-day task will be there even for the people who are working with the reporting on SaaS, right? So that way we can create this kind of a conditional statements with the macros, and obviously applying some logics over this will help you to make your code more smaller to execute. Fine. And one other point is we call it as a data-driven macro. So in the previous example, if you have seen, if sysday equals to Monday, then proc print. If sysday equals to Tuesday, proc means, and so on. Generally, in SaaS programming, we learned that if a condition is given, then certain action has to be performed. So what do you mean by an action? Action is nothing but, let's say if age greater than so and so, I wanted to say that their status or their particular value to be stored under a new variable. So this particular action has to be stored with creation of a variable. But as you can remember that here we are creating a variable which is not a common variable, which is a macro variable. So we cannot create a macro variables as simple. So in order to make that macro variables created, we are just going to add one other statement called call simput. Create a macro variable and a value to that. So what is that you're going to add in here is if condition, then call simput macro variable and a value. Similarly, which is creating now a macro variable and a value which is not a common variable of base SaaS that we have created earlier. So that's the reason we require to add this particular statement called a calls input, which we generally call it as a macro or data driven macros, right? So this is one of the statement from the conditions which we require to remember. And the next point is storing a macro. So already we discussed that the modular code which we have created, it defaultly saved into the work library. But if you wanted to save it into a permanent library, how can you do that? Is defaultly assign that to some lib name of a library. If you already have a library, it is nothing to do. If you don't have a library, create it and add one more statement to that. Options mstore equals to yes, that is macro storage equals to yes, SAS mstore equals to the name of a library that you're going to create it. So whenever you wanted to invoke it, you can just invoke by adding these two statements together, that is options name of a library and so on, and from that you can just invoke it any other time from the existing macros stored, which is not required you to create again and again. You can just invoke it from the existing library you have. That is how you can store and re-invoke the macros. Okay. And last part is debugging macro errors. So as this macros involves a huge coding, there are certain options. If you remember, options equals to known number, page size, line size. You have created some options. So here we call it as a debugging options. One of the option we have is mlogic, which will be checking the logical errors. What do you mean by that? For example, I write a loop, do I equals to 1 to 10. So which means it will be showing you that 1 is resolved to 2, 2 resolved to 3, 3 resolved to 4, so on. The loop comes out at 11th value, so that. So this kind of an additional log will be displayed to make your code executed whether it is right or wrong. So this option will create a lot of output. So generally these are not recommended, but if it is required, they can make use of this. So mlogic is one of the system option, will check the flow of execution of a macro. Okay. Similarly, the other option called mprint, which will check all the printing options to your log window, converting into the standard SAS statements. One other is symbolgen, symbols whether they are properly resolved or not. For example, if I say I asterisk 2, where I value is 2. So what it is resolved to. Okay. So if it is 3, so how it gets resolved is what it will be checking it. Square, cube, so on. All that it will be converted into. So that's how the symbolgen will actually work. So similarly, we have few more options as such, but these are the common options which are commonly used in the debugging part, right? And similarly, few other statements that are most commonly used in the part of a macros. So that we have seen already. So here there is a list of them: do, do until, do while, if then, else if, and, mend, so on. So some statements related to the macros are kept it here, right? So this is the concept of macros in SAS. Okay, is it clear, everyone? Any questions on this? This presentation is very important to understand. So similarly, whatever we have discussed in the presentation, the same examples to proc options equals to macro, show you whether the options are enabled or not, how to create a macro variable, assign it, automatic macro variables, report getting generated. So for example, title, report for class data generated, so on. So you get to see the report date here. This generated on 17th April 21. So all that you can embed with this code, right? So similarly, many examples have been provided. So once after you're good with all that, so I request you to first please complete the entire base SAS, then please come back to the other, and then you can just execute it. Okay, so if I just show you, it will get executed all that, but it will be creating you some kind of a confusion. But I recommend you to please have a complete practice of all your bases, then come back to the SQL, then come back to the macros. So many other examples have been given. The same examples you can even try out once after you're good with the concept. Okay, so not only this, there are still many other examples have been provided, so you can go through the other examples also. Some kind of a small reports, all the looping statements, everything I have given some examples, so which you can practice once you are comfortable with the base and advanced macros. First the bases, then the advanced SAS. Right? Is it clear, guys? Any questions so far?
It's clear. Thank you.
Okay. So with this, the concept that we thought of covering completely onto the all the entire SAS part, we have done. Okay. If you have any questions, any like all the relevant material for every topic is already shared to you. All the recorded sessions have been uploaded to your YouTube. The link which I've already shared it to you will get added with all the already added with everything. So today's session is also getting added to that. So you can even go through it. And materials you can find out for every day after the class. All the materials have been updated. So you can just even go through that. Okay. So someone who asked me about a project of SAS. So this is some kind of a small case study kind of thing. But how does the SAS code generally looks like? So the basic requirement related to the banking or the financial sector. So this is some kind of a scenario. So first of all, we need to understand the data requirement, what the services are being provided. After that, like many questionnaires comes up, how to solve the problems if they are supposed to be given, how the decisions has to be made, what are the summaries information you are going to create. So all the understanding about that and a schema given to it. So on which schema we are going to work on. So the schema is provided here, and upon that you have a different types of task generally assigned at a real time. The task could be almost similar, but probably been working with huge set of data. Here is a list of few data sets that has been provided, but in the real time you'll be pulling off all the data. You might not be doing an individual task. For example, you might be involved into only ATL part or only an analysis or only into reporting. No one will be doing all the end-to-end part or everything together, but this particular project is of similarly collection of data and everything. So once after you collect the data, you have been provided with the data in this. I'll also share you that particular project to you. You can have a detailed understanding about the code, the data to extract, all that. But here is something kind of a scenario or the task based. So see this, city-wise pending disbursals, make a data set with a new column with so and so. So how do you work with different types of data, finding out whatever the highest amount of rejected loans, some kind of a scenarios. So there are many questionnaires which came up as considered as similar type of a task, which you can look into for having a practice. There are almost like 25 questions, and few of them for automation of this code, they even use the macros. So there are almost like 8 questions related to the questionnaire kind of thing, which is a task related to the macros part. So all that kind of things have been given in this kind of a sample case study or a project that you call so far, so which you can look into it. And also there is a solutions provided for this kind of a project. I don't know, it's a project, is a case study. So how we require to get it, how to import the data, how to have the SAS files. So once after, how do you write a conditions? So whatever the SAS code we have learned, so to understand it, you should be first very much thorough in the SAS programming. Then you will be able to understand all these codes. So whatever we have learned, the same code is there, but only thing is how you are implementing a logic, how you are applying it to your question, and what is the solution to be given up. So this is one sort of a solution. Probably you might have n number of ways of writing the solutions on it, right? So you can just keep on executing. All these are the executed codes. The only things that you have to do is like assigning a data. So from where you are calling it, whatever the data I'm providing you, you have to properly read it, create a data set, and then just execute these queries and see it. Okay, so probably you can also develop your own codes, but see, this is some kind of a sample, one who wanted to look into the project, how complex it would be, the same type of a task which is created. Okay, there is some kind of a confidential parts of not this actually, there is other projects screenshots I have, but that are confidential which I cannot show you, but it also looks very similar to this one. Okay, so please can go through this. I'll share you this project to you. There are some datas, whatever the datas I worked on, the same datas are given to you here, so you can just even go through them. Okay, read the SAS data files, the SAS codes for that. Nothing to do, just you have all the codes, just keep it executed, but just you need to bridge them all together. So these are all the datas for that, so you can go through them once after you get some time, and all the datas you can read it. These are all the different types of datas. All of them are CSV files, few of them are text files. How you are able to read it, how you are able to create a data sets, and certainly, and finally you are creating a SAS codes, you can do it. So this is how similarly a project looks like, but this is a sample case study which will help you to understand more of a real time, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Krishna, for explaining in detail. Can you show me what's the output we generally a SAS programmer will present in the output? For example, you gave me a test case,
No.
case study,
No.
which I worked with and make some output. What all you expected, I have made it.
Right.
But how I will propagate it to you? How can I show it to you?
Right. So coming to that, let's assume a type of a project once again, just a second. Okay. So Bhushan, you can see this. This is something called as a data exploration. So data exploration, we generally do not show how the result or report that is getting created. This is more overly to the data reading. When it is coming to the reports, when you execute a report for certainly, the reports are generally displayed in the form of a tabular formats by creating all the proc means and everything that you have already done, right? The similar report that you're able to present it onto the SAS procedures like a proc print or something, the similar type of a result you will be populating it. So one other way of reporting is like whether you go it with the graphical representation, which you have done already using this different procedure called SGPlot and so on. So here also you'll be customizing that represent based on some type of a plotting, whether it could be a scatter plot, whether it could be some kind of an other representations. We generally report it in two ways, whether it can be an analysis or whether it could be some kind of a graphical representations. So generally these are the two ways we represent our output to be displayed, and probably that output will be converted to your PDF format or any other format to not having any dependency of SAS who else is seeing the report. So that way it will be created.
Yeah, Krishna, you have just shown me the code, but generally after completing my analysis or preparing my report, I'm showing some graphs along with some insights. Can you show me that?
Actually, I'm not having these data loaded, Bhushan. If these data are loaded, then I would have shown you one kind of an output. So I have to load all these data first and make that data to the SAS Studio. Then I'll be able to do that. I don't have all these data loaded because you can see there are a lot many files which are supposed to upload it. So these are all the different types of files, all the system files which are there, all the CSV files, which I have to first upload it, prepare a data set, then upon that I have to execute a code upon this. So then we'll be generating a report. So I've just not extracted all the data here, so which will be taking some time. So that's the reason I'm not able to show you the report. But certainly, how do I say? I think you have attended our like a reporting class, the ODS and everything. No, the similarly it will be looking like. But these are the datas you have. when you get some time, try to work on this. If you still have any question, you can just let me know. Even the next week also we are meeting now. If possible, I'll try to just add up these datas, and next week we'll meet up for the Tableau, right? So then I'll try to execute this code.
Thank you.
Okay. I can try to show you that. Right. Any other questions? Any other doubts you have so far on the SaaS? So with this, we are done with the SaaS completely. So tomorrow we'll be starting our Tableau. Right. So the basic understanding of a Tableau, installations and everything we'll see. Tomorrow we'll try to finish it off all the base, not the base, the like basic chats and everything. So next week we'll try to complete all the advanced chats, so that we'll be good to work on the Tableau part. So meanwhile, any questions on this SaaS part that we have covered so far from right first till now? Anyone, guys?
Hi Krishna, are you coming to Ematicus?
No, Rohul. As of now, the situation is not really good out, so that's the reason I'm not coming. Actually, 2 weeks before I've come there, and
Okay.